Hi everybody, and welcome to video module 5, Plagiarism and Academic Honesty and Citation. So for the first part of this module, we'll be having a chat with Mr. Brown, Mr. Ralph, and Mr. Dickinson. And we'll just be talking a little bit about academic honesty and academic malpractice here at ISM and in the IB. So I'm going to get us started just by giving you a brief explanation of what plagiarism is. In a nutshell, it is borrowing someone else's words and ideas and using them as if they were your own. So plagiarism can be intentional or accidental, but the consequences are the same. And so examples of plagiarism include the more obvious to the not so obvious. So plagiarism includes borrowing someone else's essay, downloading one from a free essay site, obviously. Plagiarism also includes using your own work that you have completed from a previous assignment and using it again for a new assignment, even though it's your own work. It also includes borrowing large chunks of text and putting it in there, even if it's cited, but without quotes. It includes sentences that you've borrowed from another author that are just direct sentences without indicating that they're a direct quote. Even taking sentences, entire sentence structures, and simply substituting out some vocabulary words. And then finally, even if all of the words are your own, the structure is your own, but you don't cite the thought that where you got that information, that also constitutes plagiarism. And so before we start talking about some of the consequences, you might be wondering, well then why would anybody plagiarize? Part of the reason why people plagiarize is oftentimes they don't exactly know what constitutes plagiarism. So it's really important that you have a strong awareness and understanding of what plagiarism is. Also, laziness. Sometimes you procrastinate and you put off your work until the last minute and you don't have time to do your work the proper way. And then also, I really believe that not taking good notes and having a note-taking method also leads to plagiarism, because what often happens then is if you skip that second part of step 4 of the Big Six, which is use of information, and that second part is the extraction piece, if you miss that and you simply go from reading your essay and then typing or reading an article and typing your essay, you're missing that, taking the facts out, combining them with something else to create something that's purely your own. If you skip that part, plagiarism is much more likely to occur. So let's talk a little bit about the consequences here at ISM for academic malpractice. Mr. Brown, Mr. Dickinson?
Yeah, I mean, just before we go on to the consequences, I'm going to just go up here to our core values. So right here, standing for ISM, is integrity. And I think with integrity, that's the beginning of our academic honesty policy. So when you think about, I think students sometimes think it's just a little bit of a game. Can we pass off someone's work? Can I cut a few corners? But the reality is it's a huge piece in an academic institution to try to cheat the system or try to pass off someone else's work for your own. Because with us, integrity means doing the right thing when nobody else is looking. And so with our policy, this is in the student handbook, the new one this year, available online on the .org site. Page 25 starts talking about what is academic honesty, and it talks about integrity. And I think that's really important. And there are some consequences for those who end up either by intention or by accident not following through with our policy. Mr. Dickinson?
Yeah, again, before we move on to the consequences, Ms. Doyle mentioned accidental plagiarism. And this has come across my desk on a number of occasions where, for example, group work in science, where you've done an experiment in the lab, you've worked in a group of 3 or 4, and you've all collected the same data. That doesn't mean that the analysis should be a group analysis. And your teachers will tell you that they're looking for your ability individually to analyze that data. And so you get home that evening and you realize that you've left your data on a piece of paper in your locker or in your bag or whatever. And so you email your friend or you call your friend and they send you their data table either by instant message or Skype or email attachment or whatever, and you simply take that data table that they've already analysed with manipulated data, and you enter that into your lab report. That's plagiarism. I mean, the excuse that we get from students is it was a group project, the data's the same. Yes, the raw data's the same, but the analysed data must be individual. And so that idea of accidental plagiarism, where you're working in a group and you enter a group's data as your own work after a friend has analysed the data, is plagiarism. And that could go for anything other than science, where you're working in groups and you're collecting data. For a psychology group, for the Psych IA week this week, you might be working in groups collecting data. You still need to come up with your own personal approach to the way that you analyse and present that data. This has often led to a breakdown in friendships. Moving on to the consequences, the person that takes the data and inputs it into their lab report or into their essay obviously has plagiarised the work. It's not their work, it's the work, the intellectual property of somebody else that they've included and passed off as their own. But equally, the person that provided that work willingly and sent that work to their friend is the colluder. They've colluded in the act of academic malpractice, and the consequences for both the person plagiarising and the person supplying that work are the same. The consequence is that for an internal assessed piece of work or a homework or an IB assessment or an ISM assessment, the work will receive 0, which will certainly have a knock-on effect to your semester's grade. Repeated offence will have a more severe consequence, and we have had the case where academic malpractice has resulted in a student being asked to leave ISM on at least one occasion in my last 5 years here. So we up the consequence for each time a plagiarism or an academic malpractice offence occurs. But the first offence is that you'll receive 0 for that piece of work. You'll receive a warning and a reminder of what our academic malpractice policy states, and then hopefully you'll sort of learn from that it's just not worthwhile and you need to do that work
What's
yourself.
interesting, I think, Mr. D, and I'm sure you remember these conversations we've had with students, has been that most students understand that there's a level of consequences that get more serious. However, also included in the consequences is the fact that you may be ineligible for student awards that talk about good moral character. And that has become quite contentious, and we've had some disappointed students when they've talked about standing for things like NHS, cum laude society. All those sorts of things are vetted via our documentation, and so that's a critical piece. Another one is for a serious offender, we're obliged, really, because of the academic nature of our school, to relate that to colleges. So, with a serial offender, if you like, we will contact colleges, and colleges are made aware of that situation. Of course, it's up to them how they respond to that. We have had some fairly interesting situations with the IB. So, Mr. Ralph, how about IB?
Any sort of plagiarism comes under the umbrella term as malpractice in the IB, and there are 4 categories, and that is plagiarism, which is directly taking other people's work and putting it forward as your own; collusion, as Mr. D hinted at; duplication of work. So if you try and submit the same piece of work for 2 things, so for example, say you did a physics lab, which is submitted, and you use that same data and that same stuff for your extended essay, that's duplication. And a very big term, any other activity or behaviour that gains an unfair advantage, which is open to all sorts of interpretation, but that could be things like taking a cell phone into an exam, falsifying your CAS record. It can be a whole host of things. And the IB, again, make no distinction between deliberate or accidental. So if you accidentally forget to cite just maybe 1 sentence in an essay, that is sufficient for a plagiarism claim.
We had that a few years ago with the TOK essay.
3 years ago, one student did not receive a TOK essay grade because even though she had referenced everything in their essay, she'd missed 1 sentence. That was enough for that to receive a 0, for her to effectively not get a diploma. So it's a really big deal, and there's not much we can do as a school to support you in that. You as a student, whenever you're part of the IB diploma and you submit work, you sign off. This is my own work. You agree to the terms and conditions that we all do on websites all the time without reading that small print, but the small print still exists, and as soon as you sign off on it, you are declaring it as your own work, and if it's not, we can't defend you on those terms. The accidental things are often, I think, as Miss Jewell hinted at, where students are in a rush, they haven't thought it through, they haven't planned very well, they're doing things at the last minute. This one student, for example, with her TOK essay, she'd missed the deadline. She was rushing to get it done on the last day, hadn't got her draft sorted out. The teacher didn't have a chance to read through and check it. It went away. Unfortunately, that cost her a diploma. In terms of the penalty, the IB kind of have 3 stages or 3 different categories of punishment, if you will. Firstly, we can make an appeal and say this was an accident and we will go into bat for you if we think it's a genuine mistake, and the IB have the right to say, okay, no unfair advantage was gained, we will allow that let that slide.
And this happened in the May 2014 exam session. Mr. Ralph, on at least 4 occasions, mentioned what was allowed into the exam and not allowed into the exam. Of course, a cell phone is not allowed into the exam. But there was a series of circumstances where, by accident, a student used the phone between paper 1 and paper 2, put it in her jacket pocket, and it went back into the exam. She wasn't even aware it was in the jacket, didn't use it at all, but the IB had to investigate that, and for a while we weren't sure how that was going to work out.
And as Mr. Brown hinted, at one point we thought she was not going to get a diploma. We reported that to the college. She was in college already. That put her college place at risk, just the accidental taking of a phone into the exam. The second thing they can do is they can say, right, we'll give you a 0 for that component. So for most subjects, if you took history as an example, you have 4 components that make up your final IB score. If you're seen to plagiarise or collude in one of those, it can mean a 0 for that particular component. And the third is you get a 0 for the subject itself, and that means you automatically receive no diploma. Now, if that's an extended essay or a TOK essay, a 0 in that component automatically means no diploma. So, it's seen very seriously here.
And the other thing, Mr. Ralph, is not only has Turnitin.com and those sorts of things and electronic checking of papers changed the landscape for students, but equally more and more of the IB work is electronically graded as well.
Yeah. Can I just interject there for a second as well? Juniors, you already know how serious I certainly take exams, internal school exams. As sophomores last year, you'll have heard me and the other chief proctors announce on multiple occasions about having material which may give you an unfair advantage in the exam, and that could include a piece of paper in your pocket, a cheat sheet, for example, or it could include a smartphone that's in your pocket, and it could include a calculator which has not had the illegal apps and progs and RAM cleared appropriately. It was amazing that last year in the, I think it was, some of you might remember, in the sophomore exam, outside I announced about cell phones, and some people went scurrying off, putting their cell phones in their bags or in their lockers and locking them up. And in the exam then, everyone was seated silently, about to begin, and I thought, I'll just announce one more time for anyone who has either cell phones or calculators in their possession. And this was an exam, I think it was English, where neither a cell phone nor a calculator was needed. And there were 37 cell phones and calculators then brought to the front and placed on the chief proctor's table. And it was probably a genuine mistake. Nerves outside, you didn't hear the instructions properly, you walked in, you found the calculator or the cell phone was in your pocket, and therefore the internal school exams, we treat these very seriously, and it's all, I think, good training for when you come to do your IB exams, which in turn is good training for when you take your college exams after the second, third, fourth year of university. And I think you really do need to be fully aware of the consequences if you're found to be in breach of any of these regulations, so that you can make an informed decision. You can train yourself to lock your cell phone, lock your calculator in your bag, in your locker, away, so that is not going to be an issue.
Can I just piggyback onto that a little bit? it also now, in our current electronic landscape, goes beyond just the exam and having a cell phone in an exam. The IB have a regulation that you must not discuss the exam within 24 hours. And when again, we had one issue this year where one student had sat her economics exam and she got involved with some students in Japan and in Holland who were texting and saying, oh, the economics exam was pretty easy apart from the question on X. The IB found out. That was a big problem. She almost lost her diploma because she was involved in a text discussion with two other students via WhatsApp. It's a very difficult thing to defend. As soon as the IB found out, they wanted us to check her cell phone, they wanted to send digital information off. So not only can you not take a cell phone into the exam, you must be very careful, given the sort of global context and time differences and the electronic connection now, of talking to other people outside of the exam in other places. If you're found to do that by posting things on Facebook, through Twitter, through WhatsApp, whatever it is, the IB are monitoring these things as well. And if it comes to light to them, you can lose your diploma very, very easily.
I love the fact that we're doing this for you guys. I hope you're listening. It's not about trying to scare you at all. It's about trying to suggest, what are the policies, what are the requirements, and the right way to do things. And there are certainly a lot of resources available at ISM. The HSMC, the handbook in the back has MLA and APA referencing guide and so on. And there are many online sources and so on, right, Ms. Dool?
That's right. Just check out the HSMC research page, and there's all kinds of citation examples and reference guides. I know I've learned a lot during this discussion, and I hope you have too. So thank you, Mr. Brown, Mr. Ralph, and Mr. Dickinson, and thank you all.
Bye.
Bye. Good luck.